Well, welcome to today's WRAP working group meeting. I apologize for starting late. I'm in Sacramento I was on a panel with some very important stakeholders in the battle here. And I had to duck out as quick as I can. So thank you for your patience, and I apologize to our presenters for the late start, but thank you, everybody. So just a very quick update. Last week, the department held their Department of Insurance held their final workshop on the details of allowing insurers to start using catastrophe models to price their plans going forward. And that is going to be getting solidified. We gave some input. A number of our partners also gave input, including Joel Loucher, who is on our team, but spoke as a former regulator at that hearing. So we're still hoping to see a few tweaks for better reflection of all levels of community mitigation, including prescribed burns and public land mitigations, to have all of that get factored into insurance rates, as well as individual and community level mitigations. So with that, I want to acknowledge the first guest speakers that we have today are very much leading a lot of the work that's being done to reduce risk, reduce wildfire risk, and then get that information in a way that insurers are going to recognize it, reflect it, and reward it. And that's our friends at the Institute for Home and Business Safety, IBHS, which is a nonprofit funded by the insurance industry that has been one of the most important working groups that are advancing the standards and building programs in communities. And really, I think one of the most important things, in addition to them facilitating risk reduction throughout California, is the relationships they have with their insurance company members and the increased confidence that their research and their work gives the insurance companies that people are taking this seriously, that risk is being reduced, that is really, I think, at the core of what we are all here working to do, to get people really rewarded as they need to be, but also prevent homes from burning. So I'm very happy to introduce Alister Watt and Ian. I'm afraid to try. Is it Giammanco? Do I have that right?
Yeah, Amy, it's Giammanco. That was a good effort. I'll give you a thumbs up for the effort.
Thanks, guys. And so, everybody, we've had IBHS folks on periodically since we started this working group. And they came on right when they announced their the Wildfire Prepared Home Standard. And they've been participating in these meetings, and we're really grateful for that. And we asked them to come back because another piece of their work, a very important piece of their work, is to address insurers' concerns that, now we have the Wildfire Prepared Home designation, and that is to the individual parcel. But because we know that insurers need not just each one individual house, but as many houses as possible, as many structures as possible in a region to be risk reduced, and because the regulations that require insurers to reflect those risk reductions do require insurers to also take into account community level activities, IBHS has undertaken to help out with defining that. What does that mean? Does that mean 30 homes or is that acreage? So I'm really, really glad to have you guys with us to shine a light on where are we with what does a wildfire prepared neighborhood look like, or wildfire prepared community. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Amy. That was a very nice introduction. So before we get into where we are, Ian is going to talk about the community standard. He and Steve Hawks, Chief Hawks, some have been spearheading the development of the community standard. Before we get into that, I just want to recap the brief history. There's been kind of a whirlwind in the last few years, just to get everyone on the same page as how we got to where we've got today. So wind back the clock to 2021 in the fall. And a bunch of us were sitting in a board meeting here in Richburg, South Carolina, and a number of executives from the insurance industry announced that they would like us to produce a wildfire standard for mitigation purposes, very much like the fortified one in the wind and hail space. And we kind of looked at them like, yeah, I don't think so. This is not nearly as predictable as wind engineering. There's a lot more factors here when we consider topology, fuels, and wind, and how do we do all of that? And they said, no, you can do this. And so we said, okay, we'll try that. So we got together, spent a lot of time. Ian will remember Asheville very well from being locked up in meeting rooms for days, and we came up with the standard. That was then launched in June of 2022 with the first designation to Casey Taylor in Paradise. And then went forward to 2023. By the end of 2023, so a year and a bit, year and a half, we had 40 designations, which is not a lot as far as numbers go, but it's a lot in terms of how these mitigation programs tend to develop. They start with 1 or 2 in the first year, and then you maybe go to 3 or 4, and at some point you hit the inflection point. Wind forward to 2024, and last time I looked at these numbers last week, we had about 5,000 applicants. And of those 5,000, about 800 had made it through the process and achieved a designation. And that's at the parcel level. And a beautiful thing has just started to happen, which is strange bedfellows have gotten together and decided that they like each other. And those strange bedfellows are volume builders and insurance carriers. And they're really enjoying each other because they have a common problem to solve. And these volume builders, the national builders, are very engaged with wildfire. There'll be more to talk about in the coming months. Maybe 6 months from now, we'll have more to say about that. There'll be some announcements, etc. But this is gaining traction. And the bit that's really gaining traction with them is insurers really, to Amy's point, understand the benefit of community-wide mitigation against embers, against direct heat, getting the right structure separation, getting rid of the dangerous ladder fuels in the wrong places. And so that's what Ian's been working on. Everyone's excited about it. And with that, Ian, I don't know how to pump you up any more than that. It's over to you.
Well, I'm also trapped at the Cleveland airport, so just pardon the airport sounds. But yeah, so I am in Cleveland. I do have some slides I want to show to give an overview of the program, about a short presentation to try to show you where we are. And I know most folks will probably be more interested in sort of the timing. But the one thing I do want to make sure to iterate, like a lot of this is very much in the development phase, so it's subject to change. Nothing you see here as we sit today is an electric fence that's actually even been sort of completely decided upon at this point. So our goal is to develop a draft of this as we go through October and start into the stakeholder process to see where we go and to see if we can break it, to be honest. So I'll jump in. As Alister mentioned, we're trying to bring this along the same way we did Prepared Home, designed as a mitigation standard and accompanying designation program. And our initial foray into community scale resilience for wildfire really will focus at the neighborhood scale. This is where we're starting. We had to pick a scale because you could sit there and try to pick all sorts of geographies and census blocks and zip codes and whatever you want to do, but you have to pick. And so we felt we could make our first kind of entry and difference at the neighborhood scale with the goal to meaningfully reduce the probability of those initial ignitions. And then also, if homes do ignite within the neighborhood, to slow fire spread, to give that neighborhood a fighting chance against the conflagration scenario. So to meaningfully reduce the probability that unfolds. That is the catastrophes that concern our insurance carrier members, is the mass loss events that start to equal those of the other perils. So our job is to couple both the parcel level actions all the way up to a neighborhood scale program. So with that, So some of the prerequisites that we've already started working with is to let a governance body of a neighborhood, that could be an HOA, it could be a Firewise community. We will set a minimum number of homes that might be home density. We're actually, something I've been working on the last couple of weeks is trying to take all these definitions that folks have and actually go test them to see what is sort of the minimum number that we would consider a neighborhood. But they need to have a governance body, and that's to, one, set the boundary of where this is going to apply. And then the next piece of this, and we kind of bounce around a little bit, but realize with roofs, as science really has evolved, roof materials have become sort of a binary problem. You either have the aged wood shake issue that those will ignite versus the rest of Class A, just bulk materials. It played out in Lahaina. Faraz Hedayati's analysis of that showed it, how if you're on the wood shake side, you're going to have an ignition. And if you don't, the roof actually is pretty far down the list of meaningful components. So when we did Prepared Home, we called it a non-starter. And it truly has played out that way scientifically, that it's one of those big factors that if you just do the right approach, it becomes pretty down low on the list of sort of those critical variables that you're looking at. So I think we're going to go the route of the 100% compliance Class A is across the entire neighborhood, and then work perhaps a structure separation component. Right now, the concept we've been working with is looking at less than 10% structures with a wall-to-wall shortest distance of 10 feet. There's a lot of new science work that's going on right now that supports a lot of that work, and that's some of the control burn tests we're doing at the research center with auxiliary dwelling units, sheds, and other outbuildings, and the ignition potential on the target structures. And the one thing we've found, once you get inside that 20 to 10 foot mark, there's not a lot of wiggle room at all, and you end up in these total loss scenarios pretty regularly. And so we're measuring, all the quantities on these test buildings. Heat flux, we've seen the ignition points on even some of the hardened materials. That building is designed to take this exposure, and it's igniting at that spacing. But once you get to 20 feet is when you have an awful lot of knobs you can start turning in this scenario. And then finally, by the time you get out to the larger spacings, you start to get out of the traditional structure to structure spread into where parcel level is really playing the game. So do we set a maximum sort of dimensional analysis? We don't know yet. We want to make this as accessible as we feel science allows. And on the big side, it's the question is, where does the neighborhood conflagration scenario just turn into parcel level mitigation? The individual parcels are acting essentially by themselves, rather than as a system of either connected fuels or as a fuel break in the scenario in which you have a mitigated neighborhood. So that's how we've approached it. So you can do things like this. You can look at building footprint data. You can go through and chunk it all up. We've been working on how to bring in imagery into the GIS platforms, make sure it's all ortho-rectified so you can plop imagery over stuff like this. And I'm just showing some examples of some of the test cases that we've been putting through and as we work these concepts to see, hey, one, is it doable? Two, is it from an operations perspective, can we actually do the work to evaluate a neighborhood that's applied for a designation this way? So you can do all those kinds of things. And this is one of the histograms you could pull out of that test neighborhood in blue of what are the spacing. And you can see in this case, we have a lot of structures that do fall at very tight spacing. And that is a case that how much can we allow? We've thought about some of the exceptions for, say, a small area that's purely defined by dense structures, kind of a higher degree of mitigation element that could come with that. Still don't know where we're going to take it yet. We're going to try to get the bulk of the standard done first and then come back and look to see, are there other knobs we could tweak to increase some of those accessibility elements. So from a first perspective, the program is designed not to be a one-size-fits-all. It will not be an explicit set of prescriptive guidance. Perhaps like a normal standard might actually be written. It will evaluate the characteristics that surround that neighborhood, the characteristics of the neighborhood itself, both structure separation, the fuel characteristics, both inside and outside the neighborhood. And that's how we'll approach it. So the first step in the process is to use 45-degree sectors to evaluate the fuel characteristics outside the neighborhood, going to about a distance of 2 miles or so. and to look at the threats from ember attack based on those fuel types, as well as flames, radiant heat. That'll be step number one. And we do this by quadrant, looking outside the boundaries of our neighborhood. And then we'll do some work to understand, what are some of the maximum potential flame lengths that could come with those fuel types. That allows us to incorporate things like engineered fuel breaks, or even fuel breaks functioning at roadways, functioning as fuel breaks. There could be the scenarios where you do have some of those features, and all your mitigation actions would be related to more ember transport. Or in the flip, maybe you're in a very you're surrounded by dense fuels, and you got to have it all. You got to have radiant heat protection, direct flame protection, ember protection, something like Wildfire Prepared Home Plus in terms of a total mitigation level for those homes that are going to be experiencing that. So that's sort of the idea. And then we're going to look at it from this perimeter zone that sort of immediately interacts with those exterior fuels, and then a zone inside the neighborhood. So you potentially have different mitigation requirements for that perimeter zone versus interior, or there's probably many of cases out there where they're all going to be the same. But it's the idea of letting the surroundings help dictate what mitigation elements that you'll have to have in these two zones. Then we move inside the neighborhood, is to look at really the connective fuels assessment. How are their pathways from home to home? Well, how does fuel, vegetative or built environment things, connect each home? And we want to do a node approach. We have a really nice concept. However, we have not actually tested it from a feasibility standpoint using aerial imagery to assess all these different, basically, nodes of fuel that exist around a parcel. And how many of these nodes connect to neighboring houses? That could be fences. It could be, clusters of vegetation really packed closely together, things like that, and set a requirement for those elements that you would have to meet. So again, a lot more still to come on developing that process. We have a general concept. We feel like it, but again, I mentioned we haven't been able to test it for real yet, and that's something we're working on with even some of our members who've offered to help with some of the products that they have access to. So we're actually thankful to that. And then as we look at this connected fuel problem, the concept revolves around, do we evaluate it for the entire neighborhood, or do we look at, say, more of a pathway approach, which is a continuous block, or contiguous block is a better way to sort of put it, is where can fire spread through a series of homes most effectively without being broken up by a road or something that would create sort of a natural break in the fuel chain. So that's sort of the idea. Would you evaluate these connected fuels each block by block, and then you create some percentage requirement? We don't know yet. We feel like we can actually look at these blocks or pathways pretty well. The question is, where do we want to go with it in terms of that connected fuel piece? So there will be a connected fuel element. The question still remains, as we sit today, is it going to apply blanket to the neighborhood where you're evaluating that whole neighborhood holistically, or do we chunk it up into this block element, looking more at a structure to structure fire path that could happen? I should mention one of the things that we will do is, we are focused on the entire surroundings of the neighborhood, the full 360 degrees. And yes, I do understand that the wind climatology plays a role, and there's going to be preferred pathways, but from an engineering standard development, we want to account for all possibilities and make sure that that's well captured in our mitigation actions and requirements that ultimately will get determined for a given neighborhood. So some of those things, think about some of the work we've done at the lab, being able to protect, these kind of scenarios. This is a shed control burn, and you can actually really visualize the three main ignition mechanisms right here. You can't feel the radiant heat, but you could probably imagine what that is. You can see the flame stretching, and you can clearly see the structural embers from this case. Again, in the connected fuel space, could be the fences. This is part of one of our prepared home demonstrations of some of those science concepts about breaking that chain. It's the same thing. Can we make sure there's not this complete connected chain of nodes from home to home? So that's one of the pieces of the puzzle. Same here. This was some of the fuel breaks work that we did, looking at how stretched flame it was a pine straw fuel bed that mimics grassland fire. So a big long flame link stretching to vegetation. So can we set that fuel break distance that a neighborhood may have already done, or maybe they can get a grant to do. So they don't have to put in the max protection in that perimeter zone. Maybe they can just go with an ember defense from something like prepared home base. So that's the idea, to be able to account for some of those things that communities can go do. And I really like the idea of being able to provide a more kind of pinpoint focus for some of those things that you can get grant dollars to go do. So some of the all important timelines as we sit today, as I mentioned, this is Alister knows I'm overly sort of optimistic about most things I do at IBHS. But here, the one we will know is we will get our draft standard likely by the end of October. Our members have asked us to provide it by the end of the year. I think we can beat that. And then we can start into stakeholder feedback. We need to get member feedback first and walk them through it. The goal will be to do that at our November set of committee meetings that are coming up in a couple of months. And then as we sort of work the next piece is, can we identify some pilot neighborhoods, both with builders and then maybe some that do exist that maybe were built under some of the new WUI codes, or have a large number of prepared homes already in them, that could be first opportunities as pilots for this. So we think that's probably going to spin itself up early next year. We'll collect more stakeholder feedback from, I see some familiar faces and names on this call. So several of you, I'm sure, will hear from us, and we'll start to work some of those feedback elements. But as I mentioned, right now, we're still trying to test some of these elements to get a draft together. And then as we go forward in time over the course of 2025, start to do these pilot first steps, and then see how the business operations for us shakes out. For those who don't know, IBHS, we're between 70 and 80 folks total staff. So we have to manage our resources to work the program and make sure our business operations are well established for the program and the data part that comes with it. So I say this right now, current approach kind of followed the lead of Prepared Home, where we look at a California potential rollout. The options for other states start to come in when rate filings start to emerge. And that's something we've started to use as we look outward for Prepared Home already. And we'll probably use the same model here for Prepared Neighborhood. So that's where we sit today. For this group in terms of stakeholder work, I think late this year into early next is going to be that time frame where we're going to reach out and look for some of that feedback. We're going to try our best to break the thing and make sure our processes we feel are really sound, as well as the technology and back-end data side to support the business operations. So that's where we sit today. Right now, we hope to be able to run some of the mitigation requirements through the Prepared Home program. That makes our data processing quite easy, is to use those standards to form some of the basis for the mitigation elements that come in to play here. So that's where we're at. I am happy to try to answer some questions. I say try because a lot of these I may not have answers for you today as we sit here in September or late September. But that's we're on that path. And so this is what our members have asked us to do. The main goal is that draft standard by the end of this year. That's been their biggest push, is to get that out into the space or public sphere, to set up that initial neighborhood approach. So that's where we're at. I'll stop sharing, and happy to do my best to answer some questions. Alister can jump in if I missed anything, just sort of going through our basic framework that we've got as we sit here today.
Well, thank you so much, Ian and Alister. And I think almost on every single one of these RAP working group meetings, I at some point feel compelled to say that we are acknowledging that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've come a long way in a short time of understanding more about wildfire risk reduction, and we still have a long way to go, but we are on the road. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and acknowledge that some of the questions, are genuinely just people trying to figure out how are we going to meet the standard that you eventually come up with. So we had, and I did, since I started the conversation mentioning the workshop last week and the fact that we're still hoping that there will be 2 more pieces to the CAT model reg requiring that insurers take every mitigation into account. You are not looking at things like controlled burns and like outlying, nearby forest management, right? This is really
yeah, that's correct, Amy. We would like, though, in the data piece to include those when neighborhoods have they have those elements that have occurred around them. We're going to build the data, the variables necessary to bring those in, because there are things, and we've approached it from beyond the engineering that was presented. What would you want the insurers or CAT modeler world to know?
Right.
So if you have those elements, put them into there. They won't be a requirement of the data or the actual mitigation standard, but they'll be available for the neighborhood to include them with their app, their package. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know at this point, IBHS will handle the external fuels assessment, connected fuels, things like that. How much the neighborhood itself would have to provide. It's possible maybe they do their own drone imagery, their neighborhood. We have to look at the cost recovery options, the business operations plan, and all that. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. So some of the
can we start with Lisa Hughes, who's a UP staff person? Are you saying that the structure separation has to be 20 feet? Because that would wipe out suburban neighborhoods.
So right now, the way we look at it, it's if 10% or more of the neighborhood is less than 10 feet, then that would be a prerequisite for not being qualified. I will say one of the encouraging things working with a couple of the builders that we've sort of walked through this exact same process, and we had one that's even shared some of their initial CAD drawings with it. They felt pretty good about being able to manage that. And this wasn't in a substantial affluent development. And so that really gave us some hope that we can meet that 10% less than 10-foot spacing kind of requirement here. We originally toyed with using a mean or a median and felt that might actually not give enough space or wiggle room to be able to work that. And I do think we will be able to sort of craft, like if you think about a mixed use development with tightly spaced multifamily that might be in there, we think with a higher level of mitigation protection, you probably can allow some subset of that. It's just going to have a spatial area requirement that goes with it, because we've watched too many of these catastrophes play out when that gets sort of out of hand, and that would obviously defeat the purpose of trying to reduce that probability framework. So I saw a question too on the distance about around a neighborhood. We would look to evaluate the fuel characteristics out about 2 miles. 360 all the way around, and that's the most. So in a case like, say you just are surrounded by grasslands, if say Louisville in Colorado was completely surrounded by grasslands, you wouldn't need to go out that far because you're dealing with direct flame radiant heat and short distance ember transfer. So those would shift based on fuel types. And we're working with some of the empirical models that are available that are already used out there to pick one that we feel good about. And that also has a good, to be honest, factor of safety in it. As in an engineer space, our research managing director Murray Morrison says this all the time. Sometimes as an engineer, you got to build the building. Don't give you the choice, and you got to try to make a good judgment about what safety factor you want to have on there. So I wanted to get that one while I've got it straight up and I'm looking at some of these.
So Supervisor Smallcombe from Mariposa County asked, how might this work complement insurers' CAT models? You touched on it a little, but if you could elaborate a little bit more.
I'm hopeful that this will, as we work with our member CAT models, it'll get integrated pretty quickly. This scale is far easier for a catastrophe modeling company to deal with than even say the resolution needed at parcel level. So I have a hope that some of the integration will get done pretty quickly. And it was at Alister and I sort of ballpark the data aspect. as you think about just using this as a GIS polygon that comes out of the designated neighborhood, and it's got all the metadata underneath it about what that neighborhood has in addition to meeting the requirements, that from a data standpoint is pretty easily ingestible if you're going to look at this stuff. I say that as a scientist. I don't sit at one of our catastrophe modeling companies, but knowing the work for really the last decade, I would hope that that could be integrated pretty quickly. And it is a scale that's actually far easier, to be honest, for CAT models to deal with.
Okay. Stephen Egbert asked, what happens with infill and adding auxiliary dwelling units? Does that require super mitigation as granny flats are added?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I do
Yeah.
think we'll have a definition in there where an ADU qualifies as a structure that would go into all that evaluation. Haven't got there yet about what's the size threshold that we go with, and it may be we actually use the work we're doing literally like now about the ADU burns at the research center to guide the choices we make there, because we're going to have a slug of data about what happens when one of those things ignites and what does it impart on a target home. So
Yeah.
I actually think that one, while I hesitate to say easy, we're going to have a lot of new science that's readily like first order usable for that part. So
Okay. And we see there's a volunteer to be a pilot community, and then a question. How are pilot communities being selected?
yeah, so anyone who would like to work with us, please let us know. We're looking for those now. Some of it will be, there are some things like the newer communities built under Chapter 7A or one of the IWUI codes are going to be in a great place to do this faster. So there's those. And some of as Alister mentioned, the builders have come our way just through some of the natural interactions that he and Steve Hawks have done. I've been, and Alister knows I'm pretty skeptical of manufacturers and builders usually, but I've actually genuinely been impressed, and the sharing of even just their information already, and the cost effectiveness of what could be the program. So if you're a builder, let's say you're building a new neighborhood, if you just go and commit to the spacing element and the Prepared Home Plus standard, you're in business. You have to evaluate the connected fuels, but if you do your landscape design right, this becomes a pretty smooth process for that. I do think those newer communities from a retrofit are going to have a better shot. I will be very upfront honest. The communities built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, I am really worried about. I was talking to Peter just a minute ago, and we were in doing our Cal Edison training a couple of weeks ago together, and we're walking around some of those places. And you start to think like there's a lot of places where this could be really hard, and we have to just accept that is the case. And
Yeah.
But for anybody who would like to potentially work with us as a pilot, or knows a community that feels like their governance body but would be a great partner to start, please let us know. I think we're going to try to test the standard on at least probably 10 communities just from a pure data testing standpoint, not a mitigation one, and then look to do, Alister, what we were kind of targeting, 4 pilots-ish to start if we could. We'd feel good about that from a IBHS resource perspective, and that's going to come in 2025.
Yeah. We've got about 3 in the pipeline, and I would say 2 are gonna happen for sure. The third one, not quite sure of the timing.
Okay.
But yeah, I will say Ian's a little jaded by the builders in
the other hazards
in the hurricane coast.
Yeah.
The builders that are under Dan Dunmore's leadership are a very different set of characters and very professional and a joy to work with. So we very much appreciate that.
Well, yeah, it's been a little surreal to have Dunmore be an ally here and great on a lot of levels. Because he had been a lobbyist for Farmers Insurance Company for many years. Listen, we have great questions, but we do have one more you could answer, and then if you want to stay on and type answers in, you're welcome to while the other presenter is speaking. But it was Neil Peterson, who is one of our longtime working group members, is very active in his community, and it was good to see you at Ember Stomp a couple weeks ago, Neil. He suggests, why not include a defensible space requirement, zone 0, for the limited structure separation problem? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's, Brian is on the right side of where we're headed with that sort of exception zone that would have almost maybe a 0 connective fuel requirement that goes with it. So it'd be high-end D-space mitigation and likely the max protection on hardened exterior building materials. So yeah, our minds are at that same space. The question mark as we sit right now is how much could we allow?
Right.
Because we do know if we do get an ignition in there, it's hard to stop it in sort of that chain of events that unfolds. Now, you do know, like if we keep sort of this as an isolated island, I hate that, I don't like that term, but you do give resources a chance to deal with it. And the rest of the neighborhood's also well configured to at least slow fire spread should we see the sort of enhanced ember attack and flame spread impinge outward. So there's actually in Lahaina, the apartment complex that had 1 or 2 of the structures ignite and were total losses, with others that didn't, is actually sort of an example of this. So we'll, are on the same page there, and we'll see what we can do once we get through the bulk. Yep.
So thank you so much, you guys. And I hate to cut this great conversation off, but we do have one more presenter, and I also a lot of the questions are about the wildfire prepared home base and plus designation and discounts. And we, in fairness, invited Ian and Alister as scientists to talk about the development of this wildfire prepared neighborhood program. So I want to spare them those questions and hold those for when we get some other IBHS folks back. So thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. And we are going to move on to our other speaker, Elizabeth Staves, with the Oakland Fire Safe Council. United Policyholders was born in Oakland, so we will always have very strong connections to the Oakland community. And we will always know that people in Oakland, having been through at that time record-breaking Oakland Berkeley firestorm in 1991, that the community has a very high level of awareness about the importance of risk reduction, of clearing brush regularly, and home hardening and defensible space. So Elizabeth is going to talk to us about a ballot measure that is up for in the coming election. And those of you who have been on and heard Bill Tyler talk about the ballot measure that Marin County did, you may have heard Mark Brown and Bill Tyler talk about it. This is a very important undertaking that a small, hardy band of community volunteers and their allies are bringing forward for a vote. So Elizabeth, thank you for being with us. I think, are you able to, I think you put Elizabeth's slides in the chat for people to follow along with?
No, I'll be sharing my screen as she does her presentation.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, sorry, we may have eaten into your time a little bit, but thank you for being with us. So you can go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I was hanging on every word that was just in the part that we were listening to. Okay, so somehow I seem to have lost the slides, but Emily, should I be able to see them?
I believe so. Can other participants see them as well on my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
So
so
I just need to
we can see them.
So maybe on the top of where you see everybody's face, sometimes it says see meeting and then see presentation. So you might just have to toggle over.
Oh, I see meeting. Well, whatever, I've got a copy of them, so we'll just go forward. Okay, so as Amy said, I'm president of the Oakland Fire Safe Council. But for this purpose, I'm the chair of the Make Oakland Wildfire Safe Committee, yes, on MM. And as she said, it's a ballot measure. It's the highest form of flattery to compare it to what was done in Marin, similarly to what was done more recently in Berkeley. First thing I had to learn was you have to deal with the community that you live in, not the one that you might wish you lived in next door or across the bay. And so this is the modest proposal relative to some of the others, but it is right size for Oakland. Personal honors will be assessed $99 a month for the privilege of having the city of Oakland have about $2.7 million a year that can only be used for wildfire prevention, full stop, no shenanigans, so that the city can do what we as homeowners are already required to do in terms of ever more stringent defensible space, and soon to be zone 0, but we don't call it that. There's a low income exemption and all the other kinds of exemptions you can imagine. There's a prorated thing for businesses, etc. So it's perfectly sensible. The main ways that Oakland will use the money, this is the how will the funds be spent page, is extending roadside clearance from 10 foot to 100 feet. That includes dead and dying trees. Oh, and while you're looking at trees, if there's some really highly flammable ones that might be taller than 100 feet, therefore, you could take those down too. We wouldn't mind. Just don't use the herbicide near the creeks and the endangered species, which we have. Okay, we're going to strengthen the inspection. The biggest complaints that the fire department gets right now, speaking of highly educated community, yeah, my neighbor passed and he or she shouldn't have. Here are my photographic documentation of your crummy inspections. So we'll have more voice in the inspections process. Right now, we call a middle manager in the fire department. Our recommendations are going to go to the city council, for goodness sakes, in public. That's an example of the strong community oversight. The other thing is everybody likes goats. Everybody wants to know when the goats are coming to their neighborhood. Everybody wants to know why the goats didn't finish. The goats are wonderful. They don't charge overtime. They stop eating when they're done. So they eat as much as they want, wherever they want. Sometimes they get some native plants that have replaced the invasives. You guys gotta love the goats. Love the goats. More goats. I never thought I'd be a politician, but how did we get here? We have had successful and unsuccessful ballot measures. Sue Piper was the leader of, who many of you know, former UP board member. She was the leader of one successful one, and then one where we were unsuccessful. Lost by 66 votes due to a disinformation mailer. Yes, 10 years ago, disinformation mailers funded by dark money were already happening on issues like this. Those people love the eucalyptus trees. They think that we have been taken over by nativists. That's a slur. Nativist is equivalent to anti-immigration. We don't like the eucalyptus trees that immigrated from Australia. That's correct. I like people from Australia, but not eucalyptus trees. Okay, so they did an amazing, only Sue Piper would do a 100-page after action report. She did, very helpful. There was no vegetation management plan. We, along with the Claremont Canyon Conservancy, the Sierra Club, I'm forgetting somebody, the North Hills Community Association, and some chiming in from the Native Plant Society. We did wonderful work getting the vegetation management plan, something that we could take to the bank, because we knew that it was the stepping stone to having this ballot measure. So now voters say, what am I getting for my $100? And you can say, read the vegetation management plan. And they say, 600 pages, tell me what's in it. I've just told you what's in it. You can ask more questions if you want. Or there's a link in a two-pager that Emily has a copy of. Maybe she'll throw it in the chat, which you can read the whole dang thing yourself. It has an executive summary. It's a PDF. You can search it. Search for your favorite park. Garber Park is near me. One of the people I asked to donate for the campaign. What's going to happen to Garber Park? Priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, right? Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, it's a 10-year plan. Do you think the eucalyptus trees that are within spitting distance of that woman's house are coming down? Yes. Which ones? It's in the back. By the Evergreen entrance and by the Alvarado entrance. Any more questions? We got a chance this time to revise the draft ballot measure after hearing some rather aggressive testimony by the League of Women Voters. City reached out to the League of Women Voters. I reached out to this League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters president was like mystified. She'd never testified at city council and had so much love. They endorsed. They barely ever endorsed. Do you think that matters? You betcha. So does Local 55 of the International Association of Firefighters. That's building on the fact that we have several large, well-organized community groups who have endorsed and done all the right stuff. So what are the challenges? I'm trying to put on a happy face because this is an impressive group and you all have accomplished amazing things. And I am so in over my head, I can't tell you. But one thing is that the city council didn't adopt the final ordinance until the end of June. So we couldn't write the argument and the rebuttal argument for the ballot measure for the city clerk and get the people lined up to sign and all that until July. Hard to find people in July, quite honestly. And the ballots drop 2 weeks from now, literally. So I mentioned Sue Piper. She's moved to Oregon. Very helpful when she can be. Ken Danson, who replaced her, he moved to Las Vegas. Very helpful when he can be. Yeah. Fortunately, they have mostly passed the baton to someone else in the vicinity of where they live. The biggest problem that I can't do anything about, except for just grin and bear it, is mistrust in government. It is not limited to the national level. Our mayor in the city of Oakland, who was one of the original wildfire prevention champions, Shang Tao, I met her at the Oakland Fire Safe Council meeting on a Saturday. She had a draft ordinance to make wildfire prevention a city priority. That kicked off the chain of dominoes. Yeah, she's on the ballot in November to be recalled as mayor. And the morning line is, don't bet on that race. Furthermore, her home was searched by the FBI. Oh dear. Do you think it's a bad idea to take contributions from a guy who runs a waste management company and a strip club? And do I need to go on more with this salaciousness?
No, definitely don't go on.
No, but
Only because this level of
yeah.
local, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So the good news is successes. I'm closing with that. Which is younger people who've moved into the neighborhood who weren't born in 1991. When you make the point to them that the recent fires on Grizzly Peak Avenue this summer, this July, were put out quickly because of the vegetation management work of the University of California, Berkeley, of all people. All we're asking to do is to extend that vegetation management south, right? That's it. Cal Fire designated that as a good example of wildfire vegetation management. And then, so with these young people, we're going to do some door hanging for sure, but no yard signs. We're going full Instagram. So it's exciting to actually bring in these young people and engage them in crafting the strategies for reaching people such as themselves. So if you have 1 minute left for questions, at my last slide, there's the website, as I mentioned, the vegetation management plan, their ballot measures there. A lot of frequently asked questions are there, but I'd like to hear your questions. And I've given my email address in case we run out of time.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We really appreciate it. We have one question here. What does your polling say about support for MM?
If we had some polling, I'd be a lucky person. Right now, I'm trying to get walking lists, which are when you go block by block, you have a list of registered voters. Should have had them a month ago, you think? I have
Yeah.
people who are so enthusiastic. They just say most of the people in our neighborhood are registered, right? Okay, so we waste some door hangers. They're saying to the people who answer the door, like, oh, I'm sorry you're not registered. If you're eligible to vote, please do so on behalf of this measure. And if you're not eligible for, or don't wish to, please talk to your neighbors and make sure that they get that same message, would you think? So it's not a bad thing to spend a little money on door hangers. You've got people out on a sunny fall day when it's hot enough and dry enough that the motivation is evident.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think we all appreciate your time and the work that you're doing, and we feel you. There's a very wide range of stakeholders that participate in these working group calls, from grassroots volunteers like yourself and your neighbors, to people who are in the technology world and the insurance world. And in general, I think we all acknowledge how many more dollars we need to be finding to support risk reduction. You know, some of these, the problems you're touching on, people's views about eucalyptus trees versus other types of trees are really, really tricky. Emily has put Elizabeth's contact information in the chat. I'm so grateful to our IBHS friends and to our Oakland Fire Safe Council friends for being part of this group's work and presenting information. I always want to give acknowledgements to my team, Emily Rogan, Annie Barber, Val Brown, Ben Laterno, Jordy Bach, and my whole team, Joel Loucher, you know, that are fanned out across the state with our ears open, trying to educate and keep things moving to reduce risk and get people the incentives and rewards with insurance that they need. I want to just close by acknowledging at last Friday, United Policyholders hosted our annual Up to Good fundraiser, which is really an important event for us because it's part of the pie of our revenue streams that contribute to us being able to run our 3 programs all over the state and country. We gave out 2 awards on Friday night. One of them was to Rosemary Smallcombe, Supervisor Smallcombe, who really is in some ways, she's the co-founder with me of this working group. And there you see me presenting Rosemary with her award. It was really her impetus for us to get this effort going, keep it going, and very importantly, engage our firefighting agency working group members like Bill Tyler, Mark Brown, Paul Lowenthal, and the folks in all over the state that dial into these calls. We also gave an award to Annie Barber because not only is she one of these people who lost her home in a wildfire, pays forward the lessons that she learned to help other people get through their wildfire recovery, but she's now very much in this work stream of getting residents engaged in knowing what they need to do, doing those things, and getting the financial rewards that they deserve for the work that they're doing. So with that, I want to say thank you to our presenters. We will be sending out the notice for the next meeting, and as we always do, brainstorming speakers that are going to really get to those key issues that all of our working group members are working through. And we will send that out to everybody. But for today, that's a wrap.